last year and a half. So whenever we went into the donation center, like always, he would sign in. And I went to go sit down, and when I turned around, he was gone. About 15 minutes later, he came back. When we were walking to the car, by his actions, I didn't want to ask any questions. He just said he couldn't donate. On the way home, it was really quiet. He was telling me right before we got into the driveway how much I meant to him. Working away, he experienced a life that he wasn't used to, because everything in my area normally stays in that area, and the men do go away to work and come back home to the women. And he got involved with people he worked with. He was in a different lifestyle, and he told me that he'd been having an affair for about a year and a half, and that's how he pretty much told me that he had been cheating, because he had to, because he'd come up positive when I was 19 years old. Whenever he said HIV, the first thing that come on my mind was Ron White, or Magic Johnson had just come out too. So I really didn't know anything about it, and it was kind of confusing for me at first. And then it dawned on me, well, Magic Johnson had caught it from having an affair. So I went through a stage of depression. I stayed in the house for almost 5 years. I was diagnosed with agoraphobia. Depression really hit hard. I had started taking medicine right away when I got tested, because it did come back. He'd been working away for about 6 months also, and when he came back, the doctor said that with my viral load and my CD4 count, that I was newly diagnosed within that month and a half, 2 months that he had came back. So we, knew it was about when I had, became infected or whatever. But over that 5 years, I was kind of worried in a way. I was afraid I was going to die. This was like in the 90s, the earlier 90s, and I still didn't really know about it. And one day it took me 5 years to wake up and realize that without the medicine, I would not be having any issues. The medicine was working. My kids were fine. I was healthy. I ended up going back to school. I always had dreams. I wanted, to be a nurse. I wanted to be a writer. I always was involved and wanted to help people. So I went back to school. I worked in nursing for 19 years. For 15 years, I was a medical case manager for others living with HIV. I was curious, I wanted to see, and be around people like me. I wanted to know what was going to happen to me, but after 15 years, I wanted to do, other things with my life. I've always, had hobbies. I wanted to write, and, I didn't want HIV to be a part of my life. I've always, social wise, I've always had I've kind of set back or whatever, with things, and I pretty much kept to myself. But I still had those dreams I wanted to go for. I wanted to have more children. All my kids, they're 4 years apart. I had a really good doctor, that, made sure that my viral load was undetectable and everything. And when I go speak to people, I always, let them know that, schools teach abstinence before marriage, and I'm one of those ones that actually, I was a virgin when I got married. Even if I knew a little bit about HIV, I wouldn't have looked at someone like me of contracting it. And, because I, waited to have sex, and I was married, and I was in a committed relationship on my end. I never would have thought he would have cheated. And, when I go speak and when I tell people that I've been living with this for 20 years. Actually, be 21 in November. Um, they think that someone looks sick, but I look perfectly fine. I wanted to share my story because, so much stigmatism and discrimination is, towards somebody with HIV, and people, they think you got to look sick, or you can't have children, or you got to be a drug user, or have a high risk sex life, or whatever. Um, you know, that's not true. I try to put a face with it, because people look at, when you mention HIV, they think that you got to look sick, and you don't. And I know everyone that has had the same status diagnosis, we all think that we're going to die. I went through depression, anxiety, you know, but deep down inside, I still had those dreams that I wanted to write. I wanted, I wanted to help people. And then I looked at my kids, and, they gave me the strength to move forward. I wanted to be who I set out to be in life, and set a good example for my children. Today I still do home health, and I still help people. I'm involved with the Well Project. I'm still writing on my books. I'm not finished. I'm currently doing another one. In the past, I've done modeling for modelmanagement.com, .org. Um, let's see, I still write for the Well Project, and I do things for PWN. I don't want to go back to the past. I try to move forward. I try to get involved in campaigns. I was in the Red, White, and You campaign, and I'm on the banner for 2015 She Heroes to Fight to End the Stigma of HIV, to let people know that this is what HIV looks like. It doesn't discriminate. You don't have to look sick. It doesn't matter how much money you have, what culture you are. And I stress that to the kids. And, when I go to the colleges, and I let them know it just needs a host. It doesn't matter who you are. It just needs a host to live. And no, we're living healthier lives, longer lives. We're able to have children, and, I stress so much. I mean, if anybody sees me like on the social networks that I do, I have my pictures, and I do try to raise HIV awareness in my areas, and I go and I do outreach for PWN, and whoever needs me, I'll speak to anybody. It doesn't matter, I'll just to get the point across that it doesn't matter what you look like, who you are, that, this is what HIV is. And I stress about using protection. It doesn't matter if you're in a committed relationship, because, you don't know what that other person is doing. Like in my situation, I was a married woman. I never thought that, this would happen to me. So, I just really, really am trying to get involved, and, um, stress my story to people, whoever wants to listen. As long as I touch one person, I know I've done my job, and I'll never let HIV define who I am, because this is who I am. What you see is who I am. It's just someone else's actions affected my life, and I try not to make that my, I don't want that to take away from what I have stored, for me to move on in my life and live in my life. That's just a part of who I am. And I share my story. I do blogs, like I said, Positive Women's Network. I went back to school. I have many certifications from the New York Medical Society. I was a member of American Academy of HIV Medicine. I've been in campaigns for Faces of AIDS, trying to end the fight to stigma. And I want to educate people, because it's not just a gay man's disease, or, it's not what, especially a lot of people down south, they stress, and now they're stressing on IV drug users. So I try to get my point across. It can happen to anyone, and I'm one of those people that it affected. And I think it's important when it comes to women. A lot of women, um, we're not looked at as much, but we have to really take care of ourselves. Because this compared to a man living with the illness or whatever, we have to really be on top of things. I was in Paul's magazine with an interview in March about Planned Parenthood and about the cancer. We have to watch having this with other things, and being on top of our health is very important. So I try to stress that to my audience and to other women when I speak to other women, and for any woman that wants to get involved in sharing your story, you really need to make sure this is something you want to do, because it'll be everywhere. Like I have issues with, my family don't like what I do, but I'm trying to make a point. I'm trying to show people that it can happen to anybody, and discrimination comes from everywhere. Friends, family. I've lost friends. I've lost family, just because I'm trying to make a point and show people that this is how it happens and this is how it is living with HIV. So, if anybody has any questions.
Entry and exit chimes are on. Entry and exit chimes are off. All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
Hi, this is Wanda. Can you hear me?
Your line is now unmuted.
Hello? Hello?
We hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes. Hello?
Okay. Can everybody hear me now, or is just the presenters?
Everyone can hear you. Wanda, did you have a question?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I just wanted to tell Christina that she did a phenomenal job and will inspire so many women to have faith that our voices matter, that we have something important to say, and that we are all stronger together. And I know I say that all the time, but I firmly believe it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, to get one voice can stand out, but together we can make a difference. I agree.
Thank you. I'm going back on mute.
Thanks, Wanda. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Christina before we move on to the next segment? Okay, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and move on, and you'll have another chance to ask questions at the end as well. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next polling question, which you should see on the screen, which is, what would be your number one reason for sharing your story publicly? I'm going to open up the poll right now. So you can go ahead and mark it. So what your reason for sharing your story publicly? Would it be to fight stigma, to educate the public or your community or youth, or to advocate for or against a policy? Just want to go ahead and vote real quick. Or something else entirely. Great. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll there. So it looks like 65% of folks are saying that they would do it to educate the public. We also have some who would do it for advocacy or to fight stigma. Our next presenter is actually leading an anti-stigma project in Philadelphia right now. She's one of the trainers who is training people living with HIV and people who work with people living with HIV about using people first language and fighting stigma. So she can tell you a little bit more about how she goes about it. So I'm going to pass the mic now to Asha. Asha, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you,
All right,
Christina, for that wonderful opening. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
It looks like they can.
I can hear you.
Yes.
Hear me?
We hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, so I just want to thank everyone
All attendees are muted.
for being on the webinar. So the story that I have to share with you today is, and I'm so pleased to be here to share my story, is that at the age of 51 in 2001, I acquired HIV from my second husband. Well, when he was a boyfriend first, then he became a husband, and then he became an ex. But that's another story for another time. And I was, first of all, I was very embarrassed because I was 51. And I thought people were going to say, you're older, you should have known better. So I carried a lot of internal stigma, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, and I kept my status secret for 10 years, for 10 long years, and it started to weigh heavily on me. And I felt like, Erykah Badu's bag lady, I felt like the bag lady. Like I was just carrying all of this baggage around. And I've had reporters contact me and ask could they do stories, and I always turned it down because I was just so fearful of letting people know what was going on with me. And my mother said to me one time, my good old mom, she's my biggest supporter. My mother said to me, she said, aren't you tired of living that way? When are you going to own up to your truth? This is your story. You might as well own it and tell it before someone else gets a hold of your story and tell your story their way. You need to own up to your story. So the next time a reporter contacted me, I shared my story for the first time in the Philadelphia Inquirer for National Women and Girls HIV and AIDS Awareness Day on March 10th, 2011. So that picture that you see of me there is me sitting on my sofa playing my drums. The photographer came in, and she saw my drums, and she said, "Oh, do you play?" And I said, "Yes." So she said, "Well, play something for me." And when I was playing, she took my picture. But actually, that face is the face of fear. I was so afraid because I knew the article was going to come out the next day. But I had told my brothers and sisters, because my mother told me, she said, before you do this article, make sure you tell your siblings because it's not fair for them to read about it in the paper. So that was the first challenge I had to do, was tell my brothers and sisters, and I'm glad I did because telling them actually widening my support system. They were so supportive of me. So with all this fear that I had, why did I choose to close publicly? So first of all, it was time. After 10 years, it was time to get this load off of me. I wanted to feel lighter. I wanted to be free of walking around with all this shame and all this fear and all this guilt. That's what I needed to do in order to be free. I also wanted to inspire and I wanted to educate other women that were living with HIV, to help them fight internal stigma and so that they won't feel alone. They see a face and they can read a story that they can relate to so that they know that they're not the only one. And also to let women know about their health risk and to understand that anyone can acquire HIV, even if you don't fit the stereotypical profile of what one thinks a person should look like to contract HIV. I also wanted to bring awareness about National Women and Girls HIV and AIDS Awareness Day to spark and redirect the conversation in the community about HIV, to take it from myths to facts. Did I receive reactions to the article? Yes, I did. I got positive and I got negative reactions. The positive reactions, they were uplifting, and people were saying, oh, you're my hero, I'm so proud to know you, you're brave. And so that actually built me up. And I got negative reactions, and of course they hurt, but I had learned to not let them make me mad, not let them upset me. I chose to take that time with that person and have a dialogue with that person and try to get some teachable moments in there when they would say to me, oh, I'm so sorry that you have AIDS. And I'm like, no, actually I don't have AIDS. I have HIV, and I would explain the difference to them because they didn't know, and they would tell me, oh, thank you, I didn't know that. So it took me a while to learn how to do that. So now, I still get some negative reactions, but I don't let that bother me.
I am actually doing my...
So I don't let that bother me. The reactions range from someone not wanting to come to my cookout because she didn't think positive people should be preparing food. Oh, that's her loss. She missed out on some good food at a cookout. I'm not worried about that. I had people to unfriend me on Facebook, especially when I got more into my advocacy and they would see certain things in my feed that I guess they didn't want to see. Some people would say, well, why don't you stop talking about it? And so I don't let that bother me anymore. It takes growth, and it takes standing in your truth and standing firm on your feet, because you will get some stigma directed at you. And so I'm a much stronger person now. And it's the best thing I could ever done for myself was to disclose. So the personal can become political when you attach a message to your story. So there's lots of ways that you can tell your story and still get your message out. You can do it through blogging, public speaking, writing into newspapers or being in a featured article in a newspaper, magazines, and social media. But you have to find your niche, find what you're comfortable in. Maybe try a little bit of all of them. For me, public speaking is not my niche. I mean, I do it if I have to. Sometimes people are always putting me up front to speak. And then I say, well, sometimes maybe people see something in you that you don't see. So you kind of have to look at that. So I will do some public speaking, but I actually like writing. I like blogging. So here's an article that I did for Positive Women's Network. It also appeared in the Body, thebody.com. And it was for PWN's second National Day of Action to End Violence Against Women Living with HIV. And in this article, I told a little bit about my personal experience with a partner that was threatening. And so also in this article, I put a message. And the message was the need for trauma-informed care and to provide screening and linkage to care for women that are involved in intimate partner violence or domestic violence. So anytime you add a message to your story, your personal story becomes political. So there's power in sharing your story because what you're doing is that you're writing your own history and you're actually leaving a legacy. No one should be writing your story for you. And I think about this because when I tell my status to people, sometimes I have people tell me that they had a family member that passed away, and the people in the family are very hush-hush about it. They don't talk about that person no more. They actually don't even say the real reason why the person passed away. And to hear a story like that, it saddens my heart because to me that's denying a person's life, denying a person's story, denying that that person even lived. And so I said, well, I'll be darned if I'm going to be denied when I'm not here anymore. So I'm going to leave my legacy. I'm going to write my own history or her story, and it's going to be something that can't be taken away from me even when I'm not here anymore. So I actually wrote one book, Gaining Strength from Weakness, and that's just a workbook for people who are living with HIV. It's an inspirational workbook. I'm also in the process of finishing up my second book called The Underground Woman to Freedom, and this book basically lays out my story, and it tells about how I was a prisoner of my own insecurities and my lack of self-esteem and my shame and guilt, internal stigma, to how I moved to shed all of that, to be free from all of that, to move into advocacy. And this is something that I want to leave, especially for my family, because I want my grandchildren, I want my great-grands, I want my descendants to see that there was a lot to my story, because I'm thinking when I leave here, what are they going to say about me? I don't want them to say, oh, well, she passed away from AIDS, and that's the end of it. No, I have a story that has to be told. It has to be read, and I definitely want my family to read it. So this, I'm sorry, I have to laugh every time I see this picture of me. This was in the Positive magazine, I believe it was September of 2014. And it's about older people, I don't like the word older, I'll say mature or seasoned, how they can be resilient with HIV. So I'm laughing. I always laugh at this picture because usually when a reporter does a story on me, I always ask, can I proofread it? Can I look at it? Can I approve it? Can I make changes? And most of the time it's yes. But sometimes with the pictures, like this photographer must have took like 100 pictures. And in this picture here, he said, give me a big smile, grin. And that's what I did. And I'm like, this is the picture they put in there. And my daughter saw the picture. She said, Mom, why are you grinning so much? And I said, the photographer told me to do that. So now I know every picture you take, make sure it's a pretty picture. That's all I have to say about that. So also, when your story becomes political, the story can become political if you move people, sorry, did that by mistake. You move people into action. That's powerful and it's very political when your story can move people. When the article in the Philadelphia the Philadelphia Inquirer came out for National Women and Girls HIV and AIDS Awareness Day, I had a lot of friends and family that didn't see their self as being maybe potentially at risk, But after the article came out, they asked me to go with them to get tested. So I took about 5 or 6 women down to an AIDS service organization, and they got tested. So, and I'm thinking, I'm like, well, this is really powerful. People are going to move. So that's also political. And in this article here, I was happy to do that story because me being more seasoned, more mature, I really feel like older people with HIV gets kind of overlooked in this whole scheme of things. And so I was really happy to do this article to bring some awareness to people that are elderly and living with HIV. Okay, next slide. Your story is also political, especially at AIDS Watch, because your story puts a face to facts. Politicians, they see facts and statistics every day, but a personal story is something that they will remember. At AIDS Watch, the last time I went was in 2014. I couldn't go for the last couple of years because of family situations, but I did notice that politicians seem to be more interested when somebody told their personal story. And so it says a lot about the people that are coming there to AIDS Watch, okay, to advocate. Your story is very powerful. Make sure that you link your story to an ask. For example, the importance of the Ryan White Part D. Tell your story about how the program has helped you and your family and the need for full and continuous funding, which someone in our PA delegation actually did. And I saw how this representative was writing, but when the person started telling their story, he actually looked up and looked at the person. So I think he got the message. Okay. Oh, okay. To be anonymous or to disclose. Disclosure crosses a spectrum from no disclosure at all to middle disclosure to full disclosure. There are many levels to it. You have to make that decision or where you're going to be at on that spectrum. And then there's maybe little intervals in between, high, medium, and low. But that's your decision, and it's a personal one. Only you know what's right for you. And when you are ready, or if you are ever going to be ready, that's your personal decision. But when you decide to disclose, make sure that you are prepared. If you're thinking about disclosure, start out small. Do it with trusted individuals, people that you can trust, that's not going to go and spread your story around. That helps to build up your support system. You can also speak at small groups in church or different organizations. Build up your support system with your family and friends. And before disclosing on a public scale, please make sure that your family knows. Make sure that your family knows that about your status and that you will be appearing in certain publications. This article called Enjoying Disclosure's Freedom was originally was in the Black AIDS Institute, and then the Body picked it up. And it talks about how I was always a carefree, happy, and spiritual, truthful person. But then after I got my HIV diagnosis, it changed me, and I was depressed, and I wasn't happy, and I wasn't carefree, and I was closed up, and my life was at a standstill. And Can you hear? No sound. Jennie, can you? Actually, only the co-chairs need to disclose it. Oh, okay. Hello, can you hear me now? No sound, Jennie. Hello, can you hear me? Everyone can hear me now? Okay, good. Okay, good. All right, what was the last word? Do I have to go back some? Okay, good. Okay, advocacy and disclosure. This is something we were just talking about yesterday in PWN's leadership meeting, and so it was different opinions on disclosure. Even though only the co-chairs have to disclose, there were some viewpoints that all officers should disclose. And so my opinion on that is that if a person is secretary, I don't think it should be disclosure, because you'll have some women that are coming in that may want to do the secretary position one day that hasn't disclosed her status. So we don't want to discourage anyone from coming to the meetings and maybe possibly sliding into one of those leadership positions. So I would say advocacy is still possible on some level of that spectrum, okay, while you are being anonymous. You can stay anonymous if you're not comfortable with your disclosure. You can blog under a pseudonym or a pen name and still get your message across. You could also choose media in the HIV community to tell your story that may not circulate widely through the general population, like maybe blogging for PWN website or writing an article for thebody.com. I wanted to advocate on a higher level, which meant that I had to disclose. So I had to take stock of myself, and I had to question my need to stay anonymous, and I had to work through my fears of disclosure so that I could advocate for issues that were important to me, like HIV and aging and stigma. And so now today, sharing my story, or my truth, as I like to say, it has set me free, and it's taken me from being Erykah Badu's bag lady to becoming Alicia Keys' girl on fire. So thank you for allowing me to share my story. Jennie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'm going to go ahead and open it back up into Q&A mode. So if anyone has any questions, I am going to let you
All attendees
speak.
are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
So if you have a question for Asha, you can hit *6 or you can put it in the chat box.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Eva.
Hi, Eva.
I just want to comment on Asha's presentation. You did a wonderful job and you touched me so much because you told my story.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I am not one that is disclosing. I am anonymous. I don't tell my story publicly. I am 61 years old and I've just been diagnosed for 5 years. So
Okay.
I had that older person syndrome of, you know, how could I have been so stupid? I should have been
Right.
smart enough. You know, I was married for 22 years. My husband passed and I got infected from the very first man that I had sex with. So yes, it was very devastating. And I just want to thank you for showing how brave it can be once you put it out there.
Oh, thank you.
And
Thank
it
you.
was
You
just,
making me
and
tear
I'm,
up a little bit.
yeah, you know, it just touched me because that's my story,
Right.
you know, and to be an older person, and I was involved with the youth and children and telling them how to protect themselves and use condoms, and there I was not doing it myself.
Mm.
So thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you for your comments. I'm glad that I could relate to you with this story. Thank you.
You did really well, Asha.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. So does anyone else have any questions or comments for Asha before we move on? I've seen a lot of great stuff going through the chat box there, lots of props. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. And again, we'll have a little bit more time for questions at the end. So the third and last polling question that I'm going to put up here. So what is or what do you think would be the most intimidating part of being interviewed by the media? And this can be whether you've already done it before or not. What do you think would be intimidating, or what is intimidating if you do this sometimes? So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Take just a minute or two. Do you want to vote there on what might be intimidating? Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and close it out. It looks like a lot of people are worried that maybe they're going to sound dumb, or they're not going to make their point, or they're worried about criticism or stigma when they speak with the media. So hopefully some of what we're going to go over right now might help you start thinking about ways to get around that. So I'm Jennie again. So the first thing I want to talk about is preparing for your interview. So, you know, in this part of the webinar, I'm going to go over some guidelines, best practices, and tips that you may find useful, whether you're just thinking about sharing your story publicly for the first time or if you've done it a million times. And so most of what we're going to go over right now is geared towards preparing for an interview with a reporter. But a lot of it is also applicable to other forums or contexts, such as like writing a blog or an op-ed, or doing a public speaking engagement, or, you know, talking with an elected leader around your issues, like a lot of you did at AIDS Watch recently. But just for the moment, let's assume that you have been contacted by a reporter who wants to interview you on a subject related to HIV. If you made the initial contact with the reporter or media outlet, hopefully you would have already considered all of these things, and we're going to learn more about that in our 4th webinar training, which is going to happen in August. But for now, let's just say that the reporter contacted you. So pretty much the first thing I do when a reporter that I'm not familiar with contacts me, and depending on the publication, maybe even before I agree to speak with them, I Google them and the media outlet that they work for, if they do work for one. So this is really important for a couple of reasons. One, who they report for or who publishes or broadcasts their work can tell us a lot about who's going to be reading or hearing the finished product. So that can help us anticipate the type of questions that they might ask and the angle that they might cover the story from. For example, if the reporter writes for TheBody.com or Pause Magazine, I know that this is someone who, A, has a lot of knowledge about HIV and HIV-related issues and is writing for an audience that knows more about HIV-related issues than the general public. And B, I know that it's highly unlikely that they're going to paint me in an unfavorable light or use stigmatizing language in the story. So I can probably expect friendly questions, a friendly interview if it's, one of a publication like that. If, on the other hand, the reporter writes for the local newspaper, it could be useful to Google their name and see what stories they've published recently. So is HIV a topic that they cover frequently? If so, how are the articles written? Is the language used appropriate or is it stigmatizing? And even if they usually cover other topics, you can look at some of those articles and see if the reporter covers the issues in a fair, objective way, or do they seem to have some kind of political angle to their coverage. And based on all of that, you can form a few expectations, both of the level of knowledge the reporter might have and what kinds of questions you might expect. So the next thing I want to talk about is who the audience is. So this leads right into that. So if it's and I apologize for the sirens if you hear those. So who's the audience? If it's a print or an online publication, who reads it? Again, if it's an HIV industry publication or website like TheBody.com or Pause or Plus, we know that the main audience will be people living with HIV. So that means talking about things like viral load, CD4 counts, T cells is probably going to be appropriate for that audience. But let's say we're talking about a local newspaper or your local NPR radio station or any media outlet that does not specialize in HIV-related content and whose readers, viewers, or listeners are not primarily people living with HIV. We can assume that our audience and possibly the reporters themselves will have very little knowledge of the issue. So then we want to try to think about what might make the subject interesting to the audience, because if they're not interested in hearing the story, then they're not going to get the message. So if it's a local outlet, you can think about how the issue directly affects your community. How does it or could it affect people who are not living with HIV? And if the outlet tends to work from a particular angle, like if it tends to the political or if it works on social justice issues, you can start thinking about how to make that connection as well. Yes, sorry. And then, so what is your message? So sometimes a reporter wants to talk to you about something that may not be your number one most important issue, but is connected in some way to your number one most important issue. So that leaves you the opportunity to find ways to connect the dots. And so that's definitely the biggest thing that you want to spend the most time thinking about before your interview is how to get this message across. So when you get the request from the reporter or the place where you'll be speaking in public or whatever the situation may be, you want to try to get as much information as possible about what they're covering or what they want to talk to you about. So you can even ask if they can send you a list of questions so you can prepare. They might not do it, but it never hurts to try. And then think about how the topic they're covering relates to the number one most important message that you have. So, for example, let's say the reporter wants to ask you about why some women living with HIV have a hard time adhering to their medication. And the big issue that you want to advocate around is housing. You could connect the dots and put a lot of emphasis on the issue of affordable housing being a barrier to engagement in care. It decreases stability, homelessness can cause people to fall out of care, all of that. So, that would be a way of getting that issue into the conversation, even if it wasn't necessarily what they contacted you about. Or take another completely different scenario. So let's say that you're active in a local Black Lives Matter group, and a reporter wants to talk to you about that. So this interview would be a perfect opportunity to bring HIV into the conversation, right? Because you could talk about the disproportionate impact of HIV on the Black community and how many of the same factors that have fueled mass incarceration and police brutality are fueling the HIV epidemic. You could talk about being a person living with HIV and the challenges that you face due to these same factors that are behind these other issues, right? So you can always bring your issue into it, even if it's not necessarily what they contacted you about in the first place. So I think it's always good to go into an interview with one main, most important point that you want to make. Think of it this way. If you want one thing from what you're saying to stick with the people reading or listening, what is that one thing? So narrow it down, make a list. What I do is I make a list of all the points that I want to make, and I go through it, and I, try to cross off the ones that are less important and just get down to maybe 2 or 3, and then pick the number one most important point, and that's what I want to make sure gets in there. So make it as clear and easy as to understand as possible. We're going to talk about sound bites in future webinars, but you want to come up with something that just really gets your point across in one sentence, that you don't have to be an expert to understand. And then make sure to come back to that point over and over again during the interview. So sometimes we're afraid of sounding repetitive, but repetition actually just lets the reporter know that this is what you think matters. And that will dramatically increase the likelihood of your main point actually coming out in the final product. Okay, and then next is how to connect your story to your message. So like Asha and Christina were talking a lot about, their story and how they build that into the message that they're sending. So this is where your story comes in. So what you're advocating for will make the most sense to the most people and stick in their minds most if you give them a reason to care about your issue. So just talking at people and saying we should do this or Mr. So-and-so should do that is not really very effective. Right? But if you can tell a story that puts the audience in your shoes for a minute and makes them think about it from a different perspective, what you're advocating for will make more sense, and they're much more likely to get on board with what you're bringing to the table. So remember, you don't have to tell your entire life story or even your entire HIV story every time you talk to a reporter or do some kind of advocacy communications. So you want to find the parts of your story that really connect to the issue and think big. Think about how it connects to other people. So let's say that, like Christina, you acquired HIV when you were young with a single partner and you didn't really know much about HIV and other STIs. You could use that part of your story as a platform for talking about how crucial comprehensive sex ed and free access to condoms or PrEP for young people is, for example, if that's an issue that you're working on. Or let's say that you had a bad experience with a doctor or nurse or some other medical staff who shamed you or turned you away the first time you asked for an HIV test. What implications does that stigma have for the spread of HIV, and how does that delay treatment? And how does delayed treatment impact the general public? So you take, what's been your experience and then think about how, on a larger scale, if this is what's happening every time, how does that affect the broader public? How does that affect the community? Because that's where you get people to actually think, oh, wait, this could happen to me too. This could happen to people I love. And then finally, we always want to offer solutions. So you do want the audience to care and feel moved by your story, but you don't want to leave them feeling powerless, like, oh my God, that's awful, but really we can't do anything about it. There's no solution. So it's a good idea to think ahead of time about what change related to your issue might have made a difference for you at that time or can make a difference for you now. And make sure to insert that into your interview or your speech or what you're writing about. So it's not enough to just say there's a problem. You want to have the solution ready so that, it can be acted on. And then what do you want your audience to do? So you should try to always have an ask for your audience, especially when we're talking about advocacy. Even in some other cases, like if we're talking about educating or fighting stigma, your ask is still to be more aware, to look at people, as people first, to think about things from another perspective. When we're talking about advocacy, we definitely want to make sure that there is an ask. So for every change that needs to happen, someone or some group has the power to make that change happen. And I know Wahida, has talked about this in her campaign planning webinars as well. You've got to have a target, right? Who is the target? Who is the person or group or organization who has the power to make the change that you want to see? And then you want to ask yourself, are they, the target, going to see or hear this interview? If not, how can the people who will see or hear it influence the ones with the power, right? So there are different asks you can make depending on what your issue is. You might be asking people to sign a petition or come to a meeting or rally or donate to your organization. You might be asking them to vote a certain way. You might be asking them to talk to their elected officials. So there's any number of things that might be relevant to your issue. Just think ahead of time about what you're going to ask and then be clear about it. You want to try to iterate both the ultimate goal, so pass this bill, repeal this law, fund this initiative, and then also what individuals can do to make that happen. So whether it's voting or, coming out to a rally or talking to a legislator, you want them to know that there is something that they can do. Okay, facts and statistics help, but they do not replace your story. So a reporter can look up facts and statistics herself, right? She has Google too, she has sources of information. If she wants all the statistics about HIV, she can go to the CDC. The reason that she's contacted you is because you can provide a unique perspective on the issue. Your story and how it illustrates the point that you're trying to make should be the focal point of the interview. Facts and statistics help to bring the big picture into focus. But it's your story, like Asha said earlier, that puts a face on the facts and makes people care about the issue. So you want to use that to your advantage. So it's great to go ahead and look up and memorize relevant statistics before your interview. Because, for example, if you're talking about what, your experience and being able to reference, for example, the PWN report we released on Women and Girls Day. I'm going to put a shameless plug in there for it. It's on our website if you haven't seen it. But, we found out in that research project that a lot of doctors were not talking to their patients about treatment as prevention. So, if you read that report and you have the statistics to cite, that's great. Be prepared to share the source with the reporter. And it's okay to send it after the interview. You don't necessarily have to have it right in front of you when you talk to them. But, mention it, send it later. They should reinforce the point you're making with your story, but again, they should not replace your story. So you don't want to talk to the reporter and just say, I read this report, right? You want to tell your story, your experience, and then if you have the facts and statistics to back it up, go ahead and share that, send the link later. It's always helpful, but again, your story is number one. And I would say another really important thing to be an effective spokesperson is to be yourself. Okay, sometimes people are nervous about doing media interviews because they're afraid of getting questions that they won't know how to answer. They're afraid they'll answer wrong. I know that I was certainly nervous about that the first few times I did interviews with media. The thing is that it's okay not to be an expert on everything, and it's okay to say that you don't know. So unless you're being broadcast live, which it can happen, but it's pretty rare. No one is even going to hear you say that you don't know the answer, because why would the reporter even include that as part of the story? If they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, if you say I don't know, they're not going to quote you. And even if you are live, there's really no shame in admitting that you don't have the answers to every single question. I think personally it's way better to admit that you don't know something or that you're not sure than to give an answer that is inaccurate that can be verified later. Giving inaccurate information could undermine your credibility. It could sabotage your message. So it's a lot better to just stick with what you know, your own experience, things that you can back up. And for anything else that you're not sure about, just say, I don't know, or I really can't answer that question. And that will actually make you more comfortable if you don't go in with the mindset of you have to answer every single question that is thrown at you, because you actually do not. Okay, and then preparing for other projects. So what we were just going over is really mostly about interviews with reporters, but there's, like Asha and Christina were talking about, there's lots of other ways that you can get your message across and use your personal story to move your audience. So just really briefly, media interviews, they're the ones you have the least amount of control over, at least in the sense that you can't usually control the questions that are asked or what gets edited out. though there are a lot of things you can do to make sure you still get your message across. And we're going to go into that in a lot more detail in the second and fourth webinars in this series. But as Christina and Asha both talked about, there are other ways, and the great news is that you do typically have almost total control over them. But the considerations will largely be the same. So whether you're going to a public speaking engagement like Christina does a lot, or if you're writing a blog post or an op-ed for a newspaper or website or magazine, like both of our presenters do, or if you make a video that you want to circulate by social media, I've seen a lot of you doing that. You always want to start with the same basic questions, which are, who is my audience? What is my message? How does my personal story connect to that message? If you want to write an op-ed for a newspaper or website, which I think is a really great way to get your message out, especially if you like writing, and especially if it's around something that is already in the news, then you'll have a pretty strict word limit. It's usually about 700 to 750 words. I would say it's a good idea to aim for 600 words, because if it's longer than that, the editors are usually going to cut it down, and I prefer to edit my own stuff and have someone else do it, because I know what's most important in what I wrote. And that's really not a bad length for a blog either, though they can be longer or shorter. Videos can be really effective in today's age of social media. So most videos that go viral are no more than 90 seconds. People have really short attention spans, and if they see that your video is 10 minutes long, unless they're like really, really interested in your topic already, they probably won't even start listening to it. So make it short and snappy and to the point. Record it a couple of times and pick the best take. With anything that goes on the internet in writing or video, I would just always advise caution. Don't post something when you're angry. Make sure that you reread it or watch the video several times. Maybe ask a friend or family member to take a look for you. Because once something has been posted online, it's pretty much there forever. You can try to take it down later, but it could still be floating out there somewhere. Somebody could have saved it. People screenshot things a lot, so you can take down a tweet, but somebody has screenshotted and saved it. And that can always come back to haunt you. So just remember that once something is on the internet, you never know who might see it. I would say never assume that something is private just because you have it in a place where you think people won't see it. Like if you have your Facebook set on private, don't assume that everything you post nobody is going to see, because it can still get out there. And so again, just to reiterate, in all forms of dissemination, so whether you're talking to a reporter, writing a blog, doing a public speaking engagement, your story should frame the issue, okay? It should set up your ask. It should make sense for the audience. Your audience should understand what you're talking about. So if you start off talking about your CD4 counts without explaining what that means, if you're not in an HIV-specific publication, then you might lose your audience from the beginning because they don't know what you're talking about. If you're not sure how much your audience knows, you should assume that they know nothing or very little and make things as clear as possible. I would say it's really important to avoid acronyms as much as possible, because a lot of times, I've noticed in this field there are a lot of acronyms in use, but people don't always know what they mean. Avoid jargon, just language that people who don't deal with this every day, they're not going to understand. And again, give people a reason to care about your issue. That's what your personal story is really all about, is just getting people to listen and to get them to realize that what you're saying is important and has implications beyond just you, that it can, affect them or their community as well. Okay, so that about wraps up the presentation part. So I'm going to open it up to general Q&A. So whether it's for me or Asha or Christina, or just general questions, I'm going to put it where you can unmute yourself with *6. You can also type in the chat box. Oh, I'm already in Q&A mode. Just kidding. All right, so you can unmute yourself with *6 if you have any questions or comments.
Hey, Jenny, this is Wanda Brindle Moss and all of the presenters. Hey, guys, ladies, friends, family. You hit so many nails on the head, particularly um, some of us been doing this a minute, some of us not. And even those of us that have been doing it a minute, there is stuff that comes out that we have forgotten or cautions that we need to rethink about. So this was a great collaborative, informative webinar, and I thank you.
Great, thank you, Wanda. Any other questions or comments?
I think it was a really good presentation because, you know, my story and Asha's story is totally different, you know, and when I go speak, you know, people, you know, when they look at me, well, I don't look as old as I am, for one, and I go into this colleges and people are shocked when I tell them, you know, I'm almost 40, which I turned 40 yesterday. And people look at me, and when I tell them my story, I've been living with this for 20 years and have 3 children. You know, they're not really educated about it. And I think all of us speaking out and giving our story and showing a face with everything, it's opening, you know, people up all over, that, you know, we don't look sick, we've had normal lives, longer lives. And when I speak to the children, you know, and the students, and when I go, you know, to other events, people are just amazed to see me, you know. And you know, I'm really, really trying to stress that it does not have a face, but this is what, you know, what I look like and how long I've been living with it, and I try to share my life with everybody. I'm an open book.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it is. I think, you know, not everybody can disclose for different reasons, but I think it's really powerful when those of you who can do, right, because that's what puts a face on it and makes people think differently. Without that, they're really, people don't learn. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Asha. I'm so happy that I was part of this. Just the mere fact that one person, I know a lot of people were touched, but just the fact, I don't remember the lady's name, but she said she was 61. I don't remember her name, and she said that I was telling her story too, and just to hear her talk actually made my eyes water, because, you know, being contracting HIV at 51 back in 2001, I didn't know anybody that was my age that also was living with HIV. When I went to support groups, I was always the oldest person in a support group, and I always felt out of place and alone. And I was like, where are the women my age? So I'm just glad that I was able to relate, that I was relatable for her. It touched my heart. It did.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Great. Okay,
Hi, this is
the final. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Lauren. I just wanted to say, you know, I'm always impressed when we have these kind of, you know, webinars or training. And over the years, like I've been positive for like 31 years. So I've heard a lot of women's stories, and I'm always impressed not by how different we are, but how similar we are. You know, we have so much in common. You know, whether we're young, whether we're older, regardless of our race, we do have, you know, we can have a really strong movement because we do have a lot of things common. Just the fact that we're all born innocent, and for the most part, most of us started out naive. We're not evil, horrible, or stupid. You know, it's just that when we're in the depths of our personal relationships with people, it's just we always want to think and hope the best. You know, so maybe we don't think about what we should be thinking about, but that's a common thing. It's not. I think the more stories we hear, the stronger it makes us because we're not that unusual. So I think this is a great thing to do. I think telling our stories are important, and especially for those of us that have been longtime survivors, we can carry the story of hope. Like we all go pretty much through the same, cycle of emotions and feelings and that. But in the end, just the fact that we are still here and we're strong enough that we can talk now can be very hopeful and very useful for other women.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Lauren. All right, so we're coming to the end. If anyone else has any questions or comments, there's still a couple of minutes left. I did put up the last slide that shows you just some links to ways that you can get more information or get involved. So if you're not a member of PWN USA and you want to be, if you go to the website, which is up there, you can join through the website. If you would like to be added to the Strategic Communications Action Team, you can email me. I've got my email up there. I've got our Facebook page, our Twitter, and then we have 2 really amazing events coming up soon, both of which could help you, learn how to use your story more in advocacy and tailor your message. So HIV is not a crime, and the PWN USA Speak Up Summit in September. So I've got some links up there. Are there any last questions or comments before we go?
I saw someone had a question. Jennie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, someone had a question about what op-eds were.
Oh, okay. That's an opinion piece for usually in a newspaper or sometimes in a magazine. It would be usually around 600 to 700 word opinion piece. So like a letter to the editor, but longer. Yeah, so basically just sharing your opinion in a relatively short format. And you'll have the best chances of getting it published if it's something that's already in the news. So anytime you can make that connection, it's really great. Okay, well, I think
Hey, Jennie, this is Alicia. Can you finally, I've been trying to say something for the longest, and I don't know what was going on. But anyway, Wanda actually hit on what I was going to say, how, I've been doing this for so many years, like 15 years now, and the information that you shared was very enlightening because while we do kind of know it, we do forget. So I just want to really just say thank you for, breaking it down so thoroughly as you did, and for all the ladies that came up and said something. So it's really appreciated and well worth it.
Great, thank you, Alicia. I'm glad you were able to be on.
This is Wanda. Alicia lives in my sister city of Greensboro, and I'm in Winston-Salem. So it's great to hear her on here, indeed. One thing I wanted to highlight about PWN is regardless of whether we are members of chapters or whatever, PWN accepts us, loves us, nurtures us, and provides us with the family that we need to help us go forward and to continue to have the strength and courage in the face of such diversity. And I thank you all for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Wanda. Excellent. We might get cut off here, but if anyone wants to jump on and try to say something, you might have a few seconds. Okay. Oh, I don't know. Oh, okay. Cool. Any last thoughts before we close out? Great. Okay. Well, there will be 3 more web-based trainings coming up between May and August. So I will be sending more information about that. There's also going to be a survey that you are going to get, and we would really appreciate any feedback you could give so we can see what worked well and what maybe we could do better for next time to make sure that these trainings, that you get the most out of them and what you're looking for. So I really appreciate everyone for being on here, for taking the time. Thank you so much to our 2 fabulous presenters. And we will be looking for other presenters for future webinars. So, if you're interested, contact me. My email is still up there on the screen. And there was one session from tomorrow about the Strategic Communications Action Team, or the SCAT. Basically, we have a monthly call for an hour and a half on the third Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. Eastern time, where we, go over what's happening in different places in terms of our issues and advocacy. We talk about what we're doing. We do some skills building, some brainstorming on different ways of addressing these issues on messaging and talking points, social media, so kind of whatever is going on and whatever people feel like we need to work on. So they're really great calls, and, any woman living with HIV is welcome to be part of them. So, send me an email if you're interested, and I will be very happy to add you to the list so you can find out before the next call. And we also open up opportunities sometimes when, when reporters need to speak with someone on a specific issue. We try to get you in touch with as many opportunities as possible. So do feel free to drop me a line if you're interested. And that's for everyone, of course. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you so much to everyone for being on here. Thank you to our presenters. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week. And hope to see you all on the next webinar training. Take care, everyone.